Radhika Desai is a professor at the Department of Political Studies, director of the Geopolitical Economy Research Group at the University of Manitoba, Winnipeg, Canada. She's author of Geopolitical Economy After US Hegemony, Globalization and Empire, which was published in 2013. Of course, Radhika has led the way in forming the International Manifesto Group and driving it forward. She's to be found frequently on webinar panels and is a prolific writer on concerns of capitalist crises and other international affairs, and drawing on her formidable understanding of Marxism and economics. So over to you, Radhika.
Thanks very much, Jenny. And I just want to say it's a great privilege to be part of this panel, not only with two really distinguished authors, but equally distinguished commentators who have done an absolutely fantastic job. I must say that I feel that Elias and Alberto's book is really critically important. And not only is it critically important, but it supports many of the central theses of the manifesto that the Manifesto Group put out last September. It is entitled Through Pluripolarity to Socialism, and you will find it at www.internationalmanifesto.org. So please consider reading and signing it as well. The themes that are particularly important in the manifesto that are also echoed by Elias and Alberto is that the historical utility of capitalism has long been, or certainly is by now, exhausted, that socialism has been showing the way forward for more than a century. And obviously not without problems, which I think some of the previous speakers have brilliantly pointed out, but nevertheless, it is this experience, nothing is built overnight, so and nothing is built without making errors. So I think examining these experiences is critically important. Taking them seriously as attempts to build socialism is what we need. And so to this, Jabor and Gabriele have made a really important contribution. And I think it's even more important that although, like Michael and a few other speakers, I have some difficulties with the way they understand Marxist analysis of capitalism as contradictory value production, as I would put it. At least they have made a serious attempt to understand what's happening in China, in Vietnam, in Laos, in Marxist terms, in terms of Marxist concepts of their critique of political economy. So very often when one comes at the end of a whole bunch of speakers, one finds that one's points have been more or less covered, but I'm in the relatively fortunate position that this is not the case. So I want to focus on Elias and Alberto's discussion of money and finance as they work and as they should work in China. And I think this is critically important today because financialization, the international dollar creditocracy, as Michael Hudson and I called it, which rests on the structures of financialization and the pressures it generates on the rest of the world outside the capitalist core, is critically important. In fact, you could even argue that the existing international monetary and financial system forms the greatest drag on development today and will form the greatest obstacle to any country trying to build socialism. And so reforming them, beginning with money, reforming and ensuring that money and finance work in a way that is conducive to building socialism in individual countries is critically important. And that's why how China's money and finance are understood is also critically important. Not only what they've got right, but again, potentially what dangers exist, because I think many speakers have already alluded to the fact that in China, there exist important forces that are going to push in the direction of ever greater liberalization, ever greater deregulation, and possibly even in the direction of neoliberal financialized capitalism of the sort that we have in Western countries. And so this remains a political battle, this remains a danger. And these forces, if they are going to do anything, their first target of attack will be the monetary and financial system. And that's why it's very critically important that we understand what's going on. So the evolution of the international monetary and financial system, which, as I say, it revolves around the New York, London, and essentially the sort of hyper-liberal countries and their financial systems like the United States and the United Kingdom. The evolution has up to this point resulted in the fact that in its days of senility, economic senility, productive senility, capitalism has reverted to a mode of bank industry relations that is speculative and predatory, because the key is how do finance and the productive system relate, and that therefore bank industry relations are critically important. So today, bank industry relations in the leading capitalist countries are speculative and predatory, and they form the basis of the dollar-based international monetary system, or the dollar creditocracy, as we would call them. How did it come to this? Now, if we look at Marx's writings, we find in them a very important distinction relating to finance. He very explicitly argues that capitalism, when it is born, finds in existence a pre-existing financial capitalist class, which has operated in a feudal system. It is engaged in usury, etc. And this is the financial system that capitalism inherits. But then Marx goes on to say that as capitalism develops, it will create a financial system which is more suited to its needs, a financial system that will aid accumulation by enabling productive investment. Now, Hilferding, coming later and observing much later developments, developed this understanding in his Finance Capital. And what we see there is basically the following thesis. I'm paraphrasing massively, but roughly this is the understanding we see. That as the first industrial capitalist country, Britain managed to develop by keeping the pre-existing financial system in place. Partly this was possible because, of course, in the first industrial revolutions, the need of capital was small, etc. So you could get by with individual fortunes being the basis of investment. You didn't need a very sophisticated financial system aimed at productive investment in the British case. So, and of course, as time went on in the latter part of the 19th century, this financial system also formed the basis of the international gold sterling standard. And it could function thereby, and if you're interested, I'm happy to share articles which describe all this and analyze all this. It was able to function as the basis of this international gold sterling system precisely because it was an archaic, feudal, predatory, speculative type of financial system. The modern capitalist system that Marx had envisaged developing did not develop in Britain, but in those productive industrial powerhouses that challenged Britain's industrial dominance beginning in the late 19th century. They developed in Germany, in Japan, and in America. Hilferding doesn't talk much about Japan. He doesn't talk about Japan at all, but he does refer to the German system, which is his paradigm, and he says that the US system is very similar. So the United States used to be one of these countries that had a developed productive financial system that was aimed at productive investment. However, beginning in the 1970s, as the United States began its second attempt to make the dollar the world's money, or maybe third attempt, but anyway, its post-1971 attempt to make the dollar the world's money, that required the creation of a vast international financial system that would form its basis, because essentially by creating increased demand for the dollar, which was merely financial demand, not productive demand, not trade-based demand, just financial demand, they essentially aim to counteract the operation of the Triffin dilemma. So this financial system has developed through a long series of deregulations, beginning with the lifting of capital controls in 1973-74, 1994, and then reaching a peak with the repeal of Glass-Steagall, and it continues to this day. And this process of deregulation has reverted it back to a sort of pre-archaic, predatory, speculative financial system, which has nothing to do with America's productive economy, which, of course, over the same period has been declining massively. So the task for socialist countries in the financial realm are not only, as Elias and Alberto say, to establish monetary sovereignty, to match savings and investment, and to manage financial risks. There are certain other additional tasks. You have to manage the risks that the dollar system creates, to insulate socialist countries from them, and all developing countries need to do that. Ensure that bank industry relations remain fundamentally productive, that there exist bank industry relations, that the banking system does not become a form of usury, a form of lending for consumption, which is essentially a form of usury, etc. To keep the role of finance within bounds, not permit it to replace that of money. Because remember, a large part of the problems that Western capitalist countries have is that wages are replaced by credit. This is not a very stable arrangement in the first place. It is also to organize asset bubbles. And finally, it is to ensure that the transition takes place from money as capitalism wants it, which is taking commodified forms, to money as an accounting device to manage the economy. And we can discuss this further, but in all of this, one thing is critically important, and that is capital controls. As Keynes emphasized, without capital controls, you cannot have the kind of control over your economy and its monetary and financial relations that you need. China has them today, but there are also great pressures to lift them progressively, etc. So I'll finish my remarks here, but I just want to register a few other little disagreements that I have in this otherwise valuable and fundamentally important book. First, as others have already pointed out, I think Marx and Engels did not think that socialism was without value. They thought the socialist stage was of great value. I do not agree that Marx and Engels got their value analysis wrong. I think this is a huge problem and we have to remove it. I also don't think that the law of value applies under socialism. I think socialism is precisely a process in which the production of value is replaced by the production of use values. And I think that one very critical thing that we need to discuss is, one of the ways of rectifying some problems of planning has, of course, been increasing market freedoms to allow markets to function within certain parameters in order to create better coordination. But there are other better alternatives to market coordination. It is the great tragedy of the Soviet Union to have essentially collapse, or not collapse, but essentially come to an end precisely at a time when information and communication technology, on which Soviet scientists were working very hard, have precisely come to the point where they enable vast apparatuses of planning with sophisticated information feedback loops, etc., which we can have today, which China can have. China does not have to continuously go towards market solutions to any planning problems. China can actually start implementing a much better planning system. And I think that's something we should introduce into the discussion at any rate. And I think maybe with that, I will end there. I may have a few other points, but I'm sure I've taken enough time, so I can bring them in the question and answers. Thank you very much.
I'm Michael Hudson. I'm appearing here for the International Manifesto Group. If you like this video and ones like it, please subscribe. For more information, go to the address on the screen.